Help us to realize that his birth was so special because of who he is. Help us to appreciate him as such. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I am kind of amazed sometimes as we go through how communion service falls on certain nights when we're studying certain things. And you'll see at the end how this draws together. This sixth seal. Every time we've opened a seal, I've talked about an introduction. And usually we see an invite. When we were talking about the four horses, one of the beasts would come and say to John and say, "Come and see." And when he opens the other seal, he says, "And I looked and behold, I saw." But in this introduction, there's no "come and see" and there's no "I saw." In fact, if you'll notice, there's no human involvement and there's no involvement from a beast. Jesus Christ breaks the sixth seal and he continues to unroll the scroll, and without anyone else inviting John to come and see, without anybody else participating in everything, God acts alone. He's making a statement, and he's making a strong statement. It just happens. Now Moxie's here, and I don't want to scare the ever-loving daylights out of her, so I won't talk quietly for a minute, and then pound the pulpit and give you a jump scare. But when that happens, the adrenaline in your body starts rushing and your heart starts beating and you are alert and paying attention. Every faculty in your being goes on high alert. Fight or flight kicks in and you're wondering, "Oh my goodness, am I punching somebody or am I running?" Right? Happens every time there's some great big thing that all of a sudden scares you and grabs your attention. This is an interesting seal, because when we have studied the first four seals, we are seeing incredible suffering, incredible problems on earth that are just gang like that compared to what's coming. But what God is doing is he is trying to get the attention of mankind, and we know he's failing because when we open the fifth seal, are they responding in any way properly to the Christians that are on earth? Do we see folks flocking to the gospel? No. We see the exact opposite. We see martyrdom happening. Absolutely no tolerance of anything God-related. Don't want to hear about him. Don't get him out of my life. I will do this on my own. And if you'll remember, we saw a long time ago, several weeks ago, that the seventh seal actually contains the other judgments. And so when Jesus breaks the seventh seal, we're going to go into the trumpet judgments, and then the last trumpet judgment contains the seven vial or bowl judgments. So while it's kind of an oxymoron, where 6/7 of the way through the seal judgments, but the last seventh seal judgment lasts the entire rest of the time, and there's 7 plus 7 judgments in that last one. So we've got a long, long way to go with content to study. Why is he doing this? Why is there this? Almost as if somebody crashed the cymbals or quickly blew the trumpet to get somebody's attention. Parallel passages found in Matthew 24:29 and Luke 21. And I want to turn there real quickly, because as I was studying, a whole bunch of commentaries were saying, well, this isn't talking about a real earthquake, and it's not talking about the sun turning dark, and it's not talking about the moon looking blood red, and it's not talking about stars falling from heaven. Because the four horsemen were symbolic, and because the fifth one, even though it was about martyrs, stands for symbolic of heavy persecution that's going on, then this sixth seal has to be symbolic also. And so all these different writers are talking about the symbolism that happens, and the stars that fall from heaven are pastors that are, and all this other stuff. Go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. When you are interpreting Scripture, it is important that you interpret it with the rest of Scripture. In verse 29 it says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be dark, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now listen, in this passage, if verse 29 is talking about symbolism, then verse 30 would be talking about symbolism also. But when I read this, do I think that we're going to look up and we're symbolically going to see the Son of Man coming in all his glory? I don't think so. Because we know that when he comes back, the sword proceeds out of his mouth, and he's riding this white horse, and he has a name written on his thigh and on his forehead. And he has all of the saints with him. There's nothing symbolic about that. So I don't believe verse 29 is symbolic either. Jesus is telling his disciples, listen, in the last days, these things are going to happen. Now, I want you to go to Luke chapter 21, because Luke adds a little bit something to it that Matthew does not. We'll start in verse 11, and then we'll jump down to verse 25. And great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences and fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Now, the horse that went forth, one of them was famine. One of them was pestilence. They weren't symbolic of anything. The color of the horse was symbolic of the fact that the famine and the pestilence were going to cause a large amount of death. I believe what he's talking about here is the fact that this is real. Jump down to verse 25 and 26. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Now, I believe there is symbolism in the sixth seal, but I don't believe, just like in the fifth seal, that the martyrs that were under the altar were a symbol of something. I believe it's obvious that they stand for heavy persecution. So in the sixth seal, I believe these signs are literal. I don't believe it's not an earthquake. I don't believe it's not stars falling, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. There are actually 6 natural disasters that he gives here. And I believe all of them are real natural disasters. And I believe that because I think they all stand for the same thing, like martyrs stood for something. Martyrs stood for persecution. When you take these 6 natural disasters and you sum them up, what are we talking about? Fear. We are talking about fear. Not just, I'm scared of spiders. Not just, I'm scared of the dark. We are talking about fear like man has never known, because they are going to be naked and exposed before God himself. And while the end times, one of the things that is characteristic of the end times is there are a lot of false prophets that are running around, and they are persuading people that what's happening isn't really happening. You start the whole thing with a false peace, and everybody has a false sense of security until widespread war breaks out. You have folks running around proclaiming to be Jesus Christ. Listen, the world is worshiping the Antichrist at this point. We'll get to it. It's kind of like he goes through some of the things, and then he winds back and says, oh yeah, by the way, this is what's happening politically and religiously on the earth while these things were opening up. Fear. False peace can be attributed to problems by man. War can be attributed to problems by man. The famine can be attributed to the war. And then all the death and the pestilence and the stuff that happens afterwards with the pale horse can be attributed to the famine and the war. And you can even say, well, it's the Christians' fault. And so the fifth seal, you can say a lot of these martyrs, it's easy to explain because people have hated certain religious groups for our entire existence, right? But listen, when Jesus Christ opens the sixth seal, you cannot sit anywhere in this world and explain away what's happening. God is not acting in a way that is ambiguous. He is making a statement, and he is making it for a very important reason. What is that reason? It is the prelude of the day of the Lord. That's what the seventh seal is all about. It ushers in the day of the Lord when we're going to open the seven trumpets and we're going to open the seven bowl judgments, and things really, really get cranked up. And what's interesting is it happens in two parts. We have several judgments, and then we have Jesus returns, and he sets up his millennial kingdom for a 1,000-year rule and reign, and then there's going to be some pretty heavy stuff that comes again. Dreadful, awful fear. The day of the Lord is a phrase that is used 19 times in the Old Testament, 4 times in the New Testament. The prophets described it. In Isaiah 13:6 and Joel 1:15, they called it destruction from the Almighty. Isaiah 13:9 says it is a time of fury and burning anger. Ezekiel 33 says it is a time of doom. Amos 5:18 and 20 calls it darkness and not light. There is no way you can read about this in the Old Testament or the New Testament and think this is anything but incredible, incredible judgment like the world has never seen. So what is God doing? You open this sixth seal and you think, I don't know that things could get any worse, but what I want you to see is this is actually the mercy before the judgment. What do you mean? Noah was told to build an ark. Why do you suppose it took Noah 100 years to build an ark? I mean, if God wanted to judge the world the next day, why didn't he poof him an ark? I mean, he can, right? So why is Noah out there day after day after day after day? Because the Bible tells us that every day while he's out there for 100 years building the ark, he was also preaching the mercy before the judgment. He even told Noah, everybody get on the boat. Everybody gets on the boat. A little time passes. God shuts the door. Not Noah. The mercy before the judgment. And then the rain starts to fall. For 100 years, people ignored God until the rain started to fall. What about the promised land? I really like this. If you haven't come to Sunday school, you need to come to Sunday school because you're missing some good stuff. Abraham is walking around and God tells him everywhere that your foot touches is going to become yours. But we know that a long time passes before he realizes that. Actually, a famine's going to come and they're going to go down to the nation of Egypt and they're going to spend 400 years in Egypt as slaves. Why? The Bible tells us. Because the time of judgment is not yet full. The mercy before the judgment. Think of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, come on. Corrupt to the core. So why does God take the time to come down, have a meal with Abraham, sit under a shade tree and have a conversation, and then an argument? Are you still going to do it for 50 righteous people? Are you still going to do it for 40 righteous people? Are you still going to do it for 30 righteous people? Why do you send angels down to tell Lot and all his kinfolk, listen, if you love them, get them out because the judgment is, it is the mercy before the judgment. And to tell us how hard-hearted we are, the angels have to grab them by the hands and drag 4 people out of there, and that's all that leaves. When do the people start believing? When the fire and brimstone fall. In Joel chapter 1, there's a prophecy. And it actually comes true because there is a plague of locusts that come through and they just decimate the nation of Israel. And Joel goes back and he says, well, listen, we've had this plague of locusts coming. You think that's bad? In chapter 2, verses 1 through 17 is the warning of the Babylonians who are going to come in and they're going to plunder the land like the locusts did in chapter 1. And then he turns around following that, and in chapter 2, verse 28 through 32, he compares what the locusts and what the Babylonians are going to do as to the day of the Lord. Why? Because it is the mercy before the judgment. Listen, Israel, I brought these locusts. If you don't turn around, I'm going to bring the Babylonians, and if you don't turn around, it might be 1,000 years down the road But there's a whole lot worse judgment coming than the locusts and the Babylonians. The 5 seals are largely ignored as warnings. But there's no explaining away the 6th seal. They know what the 6th seal is. Go back to Revelation chapter 6. And look at verse 16 and 17. And said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from whom? They don't say the Antichrist. They don't say war raging on the earth. They don't say save us from the famine or the pestilence or save us from Hades running around hauling people off. No. There is no disputing when that 6th seal is opened exactly what's going on. Save us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. They know exactly who's in charge and why this is happening to them. That is the purpose. Let's look at the natural disasters, because this is the motive for fear. Not symbolic, I don't believe. I believe these are actual natural disasters. The more I dig, the more convinced I am that these are natural disasters. Verse 12, massive earthquake. There was a great earthquake. I've told you there are times when I am shocked at how God can understate something. And this is one of those times. You say, how do you know it was a great earthquake? Well, this earthquake was so bad that it didn't just affect the earth. It says it shook the heavens and the earth. Can you imagine? I mean, I can't hardly imagine. Earthquakes are associated with God's judgment. We see that very clearly in Isaiah 29:6 and Ezekiel 38:19. They are also in history associated when God intervenes and does something with man. Exodus 19:18, they're going to get the law on Sinai. They get up close to the mountain, but not too close. What happens? Same terminology, a great earthquake. And it says the nation of Israel thought they were going to die. That was a local earthquake, folks. That's God shaking Mount Sinai. Elijah called on him in 1 Kings 19, and the place shook. Matthew 27, they're standing there making fun of Jesus Christ. He looks up to heaven and he says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Tetelestai is finished. When he bows his head, darkness covered the whole face of the earth. And there was such a massive earthquake that rocks split in two. I don't believe that was symbolic, because those people were scared to death. You have soldiers standing there looking up and saying, surely this must have been the Son of God. Why? Because government doesn't split rocks and turn the sun dark. Paul and Silas are sitting in a Philippi jail, middle of the night, and they're singing God's praises, and all of a sudden, an earthquake strikes the place. And it strikes so hard that it knocks the gates off of the bars, and they could have just walked out if they wanted to. You can read about it in Acts chapter 16. Listen, when God shows up and intervenes in human history, he often makes a statement with an earthquake, but this one's going to shake the earth and the heavens. Second one, the sun as black as sackcloth of hair. Now, oftentimes when you were going to be mourning something, the death of someone or some tragic event that happened, you can read about that in Job and in other places, they would put on sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth was usually made from black goat's hair. It was really rough and it was dark, and there wasn't supposed to be any comfort in it, and it was supposed to be symbolic that there was just terror going on. I believe that the phrasing here is very important, because sackcloth is something that you put on. It's a covering. It's not the sun going out. I don't see that here. It says the sun became black as sackcloth of hair. And you think about this for just a minute. If the tectonic plates of the earth are shifting all over the earth, and there's a massive earthquake that shakes the whole earth and the heavens, what does the sky look like? People are saying, well, this is a symbol of mourning, because of all that's happening. No. This is the result of seismic activity on a global scale. You say, how do you know? Because I remember when I was a teenager at Mount St. Helens when it moved. I watched it on TV. It got mad, it blew its top. I'm done with this. Blew a whole section of the top of the mountain off, created a whole new lake. It is you talk about power. I remember being a little kid and thinking, if you don't, actually I was a teenager, I was in high school. If you don't believe in God after this one, something's wrong with you. Let me tell you, there were a lot of things wrong with people in the United States. But you know what happened about a week later? Went out to go to school. And had to get the brush out and wipe the dust and the ash off the windshield before I could drive to school. Now you think about this. Mount St. Helens, western side of the United States. Mountain, Pennsylvania, eastern side of the United States. I got out of class and walked outside that day and stood out there at high noon, and the whole sky looked gray. The sun didn't look normal that day, and the moon didn't look normal that night. And that was one volcanic eruption. One. On the far side of the country, if you have an earthquake so great that it shakes the whole earth and the whole heavens, you don't expect that the sun is going to be darkened and the moon is going to look like blood. You see, the moon doesn't give off its own light. It only reflects light from the sun. So if the sun is darkened and the atmosphere is thick with smoke and ash, then the moon reflects less light, and it's reflecting bent light. Have you ever seen a blood red moon? I've seen a blood red moon in my lifetime. That's exactly what they're talking about here. The light looks different from it because of what's happening in the atmosphere. In verse 13 it says the stars fall. Now the word stars here is translated heavenly bodies throughout Scripture, and sometimes it's referring to stars, but it can be referring to any heavenly body besides the sun and moon. Different words for the sun and the moon. I believe here it's not talking about literal stars, because if you go to chapter 8, verse 12, and 9, verse 1, the stars are still in place. And actually in both of those passages, and it says, a star fell from heaven. I believe this is an asteroid or a meteor shower. And what's interesting to me is I believe Satan tries to explain this stuff away, and he tries to explain it away ahead of time. Because if you start looking in the news, boy, I'm telling you, our world is very quickly becoming preoccupied by the fact that a meteor or something could hit this earth and destroy it. It's all the latest rage. How are we going to defend ourselves? We need to get some kind of way of, being able to defend ourselves from something coming and hitting the earth. Listen, when you get to Revelation chapter 6 and Jesus Christ opens that sixth seal, there's no Star Wars kind of defense system in the world going to shoot down whatever's coming, and it's going to be obvious who it's coming from. Can you imagine? It doesn't matter if it's during the daylight, and there's hardly enough light to see because the sun is darkened by all of this stuff in the atmosphere. Imagine how difficult it'll be to breathe. Imagine what your eyes will feel like, because I remember when that ash fell, it burned my eyes, made me cough. It's horrible. There were people walking around, you thought you were in Japan, people walking around with those masks on to go to the store and to go everywhere. We're talking about a terrible, terrible situation here. The stars fall, so numerous that he likens it to a fig tree dropping its figs prematurely in a strong wind, hitting all over the place. When the earthquakes happen, people flee to open spaces, right? Now, you don't want want to be in a skyscraper if the skyscraper could fall down. You don't want to be near a bridge if the bridge could fall down. And so people want to go to open spaces, and we see that even now. You have a massive earthquake in a third world country, and people are sleeping out under the stars. And the very next judgment that happens takes away the open spaces. Because who wants to be out in an open spaces in a meteor shower hitting the earth? Can you imagine the destruction that has happened to an already unstable planet from a huge earthquake? Verse 14 talks about the fifth one, the sky, the earth's atmosphere. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. This term, this phrase that describes the atmosphere, don't ask me how it happens, I'm not going to even begin to conjecture it. But it appears to split in the middle and roll up like a scroll. You know, you would unroll a scroll and you could roll it from either direction, but it appears that the atmosphere splits in the middle and rolls up like a scroll. I don't know about you, but after a meteor shower and after an earthquake and hardly having any sun and hardly having any moon, I would be scared to death if I saw something happen in the atmosphere, because you'd just be bracing for the worst. We know this is not talking about the complete destruction of the atmosphere, because in chapter 21, verse 1 is when that happens, and it's described in 2 Peter 3:10. But I believe it's possibly the feeling of being naked and exposed before God. Maybe he is rolling back the atmosphere so that they can see the face of him that sitteth upon the throne and the fury of the Lamb. The sixth one, the mountains and the islands are moved. It doesn't say a mountain and a island. It says what? Every one. It says moved, not flattened, because they get flattened in chapter 16, verse 20. When a great earthquake happens, everybody wants to know the damage and how far it was affected. Can you imagine an earthquake so massive that it darkens the sun, it turns the moon to blood red at night, and every single mountain and every single island has been moved? If you move mountains and you move islands and you have that kind of seismic activity, what happens in the oceans? Ask Japan. Yes. Tsunamis. Maybe that's why in Luke chapter 21 he adds, and the winds and the sea roared and foamed. I don't know, gang. But if he doesn't have your attention by now, I seriously doubt that he ever will. Look at verse 15 and 16. They are moved by fear. Well, who's moved by fear? What he does here is he gives us a list of all the classes of society. He starts in verse 15 and he says the kings of the earth. That's the heads of state, the presidents and the kings in various countries. Whoever is the top dog in whatever country. That's a status symbol. And they don't escape God. And then he goes on and he says, the great men, those are the high-ranking officials. That's human greatness in our eyes. And every single one of them is accountable before God. He goes on and he says, and the rich, those are the wealthy people, the folks who are supposed to have value, and the things that we look at and value in life. And God says, you don't escape my judgment. The chief captains are the generals, the military. That stands for Earth's might. Can you imagine when they gather together in the valley of Megiddo and they shake their fist in the face of God, like, come and get it, big boy. We got our armies together, and I'll tell you right now, I'm sick and tired of you, God. I can't imagine the arrogance. There's no arrogance on this day. The mighty men are the powerful ones, the people that have influence and that have authority. And then he ends and he says, the bondmen and the free, that's social influence. He said it doesn't matter if you're the owner of the company or the lowest employee. Do you see what he says here? This is such a bold statement that there is not a single person, there is not a single level of structure in our society that is not affected. So what's the reaction? What do? They hid themselves. They hid themselves. Isn't it interesting that that's what Adam and Eve did when they sinned and took the fruit? God comes down to walk and talk with them in the cool of the day, and they have an awesome relationship. I can't imagine what that was like. But can you imagine the heart of God? When he comes down to walk with them and he calls for Adam, and Adam's hiding. This is a far different hiding. This is hope to never see his face, hiding. But I want you to notice something. This is mindless panic. Say, how do you know it's mindless panic? Where are they hiding? Okay, in the middle of a massive earthquake that is moving mountains, do you want to be hiding in the dens and the rocks of the mountains? Well, you fled the mountains to go to the open spaces, and then he bombs your honey den with meteors. Mindless, devastating, dreadful fear. I will crawl in a cave and I will beg for it to fall on me and hide me from God. That's certainly not repentance. Oh, they're finally aware of God. They have ignored him through the four horses, and they have ignored him as they've tortured and killed his people. But Jesus Christ opens the sixth seal, and he's got everybody's attention now. They're not ignoring him anymore. But you know what? They're not repenting and turning to him either. And what's interesting is, the thing that comes to their mind is accountability. Listen, our world right now is trying to do everything they can to not be accountable to God. We're removing him from everything as fast and furiously as we can. Oh, I don't believe in God. I'm a moron. Is that the biblical term? Fool? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I wonder what would happen if you put in Webster's dictionary, someone who doesn't believe in God, fool. That's not going to happen today, but that's what God says. And what's interesting is, when he rips the sixth seal and all this stuff happens, these 6 natural disasters are poured out on mankind, their first thought is, oh no, it can't be, because I don't believe in God. There is no such thing as an atheist when the 6th seal is opened. Look at verse 16 and 17 together as we close. Their reaction? Accountability. Fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of his wrath is come. Here's the accountability. And who shall be able to stand? What's it like to wake up someday and know that your whole life was a lie? That everything you believed and that everything that you promoted and that everything you stood for, all of a sudden God starts doing this in your life. He's shaking mountains and there's meteor showers and all of this stuff is going on, and all of a sudden you realize you are face to face with God and you are accountable. You're accountable. You're going to stand before him. Who can stand before him? And the biggest shame that I see in this passage is they have a misunderstanding that death delivers them from God's wrath. Fall on us and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne. And what happens when they draw their last breath? And what happens when their heart beats the last time? Have they escaped the face of him that sits on the throne? No. No, they have not. They stand before that throne. And every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And we're quite a few chapters from it, but it breaks my heart, and I'm going to have a hard time preaching through it. I'm just going to tell you now. If he tarries for another year or two, I'm going to have a hard time getting through it. He's going to look at him and he's going to say, you wanted to live your life apart from me? Wish great. Depart from me into everlasting darkness. What a misunderstanding. But right before we go to the communion service, for the last couple of months as we've been getting ready to do communion, we have talked about the phrase, this too in remembrance of me. And for a lot of folks, we're approaching Christmas and we think of him as a baby in a manger, but I'm sorry, in verse 16 and 17, he is not a baby in a manger. And the last time some of these folks, speaking figuratively here, saw him, the crowd was crying, crucify him, crucify him. And they led him up to Golgotha, and they're spitting on him, and they're making fun of him. In derision, they're saying, if he's really the Son of God, let him come down from that cross. And I'm going to tell you, in verse 16 and 17 here, he is not a meek sacrifice for your sin and my sin. Do you see the phrase? I told you I'm a farm boy. It's kind of funny because Harless afterwards says, well, if you tell me to go down there and give a calf a shot, I'm not scared. I go down there and I give a calf a shot, because what can a calf do to you? But if you tell me to go down there and give a 2 or 3 year old bullock a shot, I'm calling for help. While I can manipulate a calf, I'm going to have trouble with a 2 or 3 year old bullock. Listen, you tell me to give a lamb a shot, I got this. I've done it my whole life. And from the wrath of the, what? Scared of the lamb? Scared of the baby lying in a manger? Scared of the one crucified on the cross of Calvary? I mean, seriously, what's to be scared about there? And that's why I told you at the very beginning that this book is so important, because it's not called the Revelation of John. It's called the Revelation of, yeah, let's not ever forget it. These folks can manipulate the Lamb because he allowed them to. And now, he's the judge. And they would rather crawl into a den and have a mountain fall than stand before him. This too, in remembrance of me. What do you remember about Jesus Christ? Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Starting in verse 23. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. This too in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as oft as ye drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, ye do show the Lord's death till he come. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, and we should not be condemned with the world. Wherefore, my brethren, when ye come together to eat, tarry one for another. And if any man hunger, let him eat at home, that ye come not together unto condemnation. And the rest will I set in order when I come. you, but after studying his sixth seal, I can't help but ask myself the question, why in the world would he die for me? Let's take a few minutes and examine ourselves as the mankind.